Hey everybody, how's it going? Before we get into today's video, I want to ask to see if you're subscribed real quick. If you're not, it's free and it will let you know whenever we post new videos. Without further ado. Despite the good times aboard the Space Exploration Force light cruiser Orion's Bow, they were still harrowing and life-threatening far too often for Zavor's liking, and against far too many exotic new threats. From cults to giant monsters to a self-styled Emperor of Space, the red-scaled Egghead had seen more horrors than any one person should, and had craved to return home to the Egghead conglomerate. The humans had a phrase about this, calling it a wish upon a monkey's paw. It was apparently an outdated term, the meaning consistent but the origin unknown. The meaning was that a wish would be granted, but in a way that made one regret ever making the wish. His wish to return home was granted via convalescence leave. Multiple broken bones and a significant amount of blood loss had marked Zavor as unfit for duty, and his friends in the crew of Orion's Bow had deemed it safer for him to be sent home until he could improve. Where this monkey's paw factored in was that he wasn't simply allowed to convalesce as a war hero, admired for his bravery and his size and his deep red scales. No. On top of the fact that he was to return to the bow upon being cleared for service, Zavor was required to lecture at the military academy the moment he was able to leave the hospital. Over the generations, multiple academies across the various continents on the Egghead home planet of Tarvin were consolidated as the three-eyed reptiles made their way into space. Now, the multiple sections across continents were all arms of the Tarvin Military Academy, the magnet school that recruited the best of the best from across the conglomerate space. Zavor had not been invited to attend Tarvin Academy, leading to even more resentment that he was now ordered to lecture at a place that had previously deemed itself too good for him. His injuries were no longer life-threatening, downgraded to extremely inconvenient. The broken bones had been set and the fragments either extracted or glued into place, so he no longer had to worry about ruptured organs from moving around too much. Of course, this led the military man to grow stir-crazy. This, as a result, saw him signed up to lecture at Tarvin Military Academy. Egghead lecture halls were similar in shape to human ones. Barring planets with unusual particle contents in the air, the law of acoustics were essentially universal. The professor was an attractive Egghead woman named Yaraten, only a little older than Zavor himself, quite young for Egghead Academia, since he had joined the military as soon as he was able. Her beige scales were bright and healthy, her conical skull coming to a nice feminine point at the back, and her short body was broad to advertise her fertility, showing off to any potential mate that she could produce a large clutch of eggs. Zavor rolled into the room, seated in a tracked mobility chair since his wounds were still too grievous for extended walking. The students immediately made sounds of quiet awe at the sight of him, and the petty officer inwardly preened. He knew he was an impressive specimen. His scales were a deep red, an incredibly rare color amongst his species. His skull came to a broad, shallow point like a gumdrop. He was slimmer than most Eggheads, but his sheer height helped make up for that deficiency. He was nearly as tall as the average male human.
So, Zavor,
Yaraten began, a pleasant gurgle to her voice.
You've been assigned to a role in the human space exploration fleet. Could you tell us a little bit about what that's like?
Zavor tipped his head back and to the right in his people's equivalent of a self-effacing smirk. Egghead mouths did not lend themselves to subtle gestures, and they could only bare their teeth when it was time to bite.
In a word, terrifying.
His voice was a deep growl.
Or maybe horrifying's the better term. Kellen went on a tangent about the difference once. Apparently, terror is the anticipation of something frightening, while horror is when you actually experience it.
He paused, realizing he'd gotten ahead of himself.
To start from the beginning, I've been assigned to a human light cruiser called Orion's Bow. Apparently, it's named after the weapon of a hunter from human myth. It's what the humans call a hab ship. That is, a starship that's capable of self-sustainment. The bow has an elaborate system of hydroponics that allows it to provide food, water, and oxygen for its contingent of crew. We supplement the bland food with normal rations, but if we ran out of supplies, we could theoretically sustain indefinitely. Orion's Bow is under the command of Captain Trent Riley. He's a male human.
Zavor took a moment to look out at the class. So many trios of young, bright eyes staring back at him.
You've all seen pictures of humans, right?
At the gentle murmurs of affirmative, he continued.
Riley.
Zavor paused again.
Human naming conventions are strange. They typically have two, which they share with relative freedom. The first name is a personal name. The second identifies what family to which the human belongs. On human ships, we typically address humans by their family name.
He took a moment to figure out where he'd left off, when he barely even started.
The captain takes what he calls a hands-on approach to leadership. He can often be found conversing in person with those he wants to communicate with, despite the fact that humans have the same means of distance communication as the rest of us. Honestly, they take their communications to another level. Each human has a personal comm unit at his or her hip, and I've seen this in humans outside of the bow as well. But Riley prefers to meet in person when possible, so a lot of times you'll see him wandering the ship.
Zavor chuckled, mostly to himself.
The first time I saw him moving, I thought I had done something wrong, or we were in danger. The captain has a way of stalking through the corridors like he's on his way to attack something. But that's just how he moves.
It sounds intimidating,
Yaratan observed.
It can be.
Zavor admitted.
All humans are imposing in their own way. How they casually ignore extremes of temperature or their intensity in combat. But they're also often disarmingly friendly. Humans are earnest in a way that is difficult to express. I've seen the captain employ great duplicity in negotiations. It's not as if they can't lie or don't understand it, but I think the danger of their daily lives must lead them to value honesty and straightforwardness in a way that we might not.